They assumed that 3 leather-clad bikers roaring up to our lakeside cabin would send my wife fleeing in terror. What they didn't realize was that Rebecca had walked through war zones and survived. This wasn't just some vacation retreat, it was our ground, and we don't back down. She didn't scream, didn't panic. Instead, she calmly lifted the lid of the old chest beneath the kitchen counter and triggered the alert system I had installed before leaving. 17 minutes later, the wail of sirens echoed across the property. Only one vehicle departed our land that night, an ambulance. They'd chosen the wrong family to threaten. But to understand how it came to this, I need to take you back a few months. My name is Marcus Thompson, an architect known for designing secure homes. When my wife Rebecca and I purchased the Pine Lake cabin for $875,000, we believed we'd found paradise. The realtor warned us about the notoriously strict homeowners association, but compared to the dangers Rebecca had faced training D agents to fight cartels, we figured nosy neighbors wouldn't be a problem. The truth was, she needed this place more than either of us admitted. Years of preparing others for dangerous raids and watching people lose their lives to violent cartels had left her with what the VA delicately labeled occupational stress reactions. She never spoke of the nightmares, but I'd often wake to find her double-checking the locks at 3 in the morning or scanning the tree line as if she expected danger to come crawling out of the dark. The cabin represented sanctuary, somewhere she might finally lower her guard. For me, it was also a professional triumph. I had designed the place with layered security in mind, hidden cameras tucked into the eaves, a reinforced safe room disguised as a pantry, shutters of steel that could close in half a minute, and motion sensors connected to both police and a private firm. Rebecca had laughed at my blueprints and nicknamed the place Fortress Thompson, but she had still been by my side for every installation, using her tactical backgrounds to refine side lanes, choke points, and emergency procedures. Pine Lake itself was everything the glossy brochures promised: a clear waters surrounded by multi-million-dollar homes, owned by doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs, and retirees who prized beauty, privacy, and exclusivity. The HOA claimed to uphold the highest standards, which we quickly learned was code for absolute control. That reality hit us during our mandatory new resident meeting with the president of the HOA, Victoria Ashworth. She was in her early 60s, silver hair drawn into a perfect chignon, wrapped in a tailored navy blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. She carried herself like a judge presiding over a courtroom, her pale blue eyes cold and calculating. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," she said with deliberate formality, "your cabin is a broken bar striking. However, it doesn't blend with Pine Lake's established aesthetic." I had anticipated this. Unlike the surrounding log homes, our cabin stood out with sharp modern lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a steel and glass exterior. It was bold, unapologetic design, but to neighbors devoted to rustic charm, it was an eyesore. I kept my tone professional. The design was fully approved by the County Planning Commission. Every detail meets local codes and environmental requirements. Her smile was icy. "County approval and HOA compliance are entirely separate matters, Mr. Thompson. Our Architectural Review Committee will have the final say." The confrontation with the bikers happened not long after. That evening, I was in town meeting with Diana Roberts, a civil rights attorney I'd hired to examine the HOA's rules. Rebecca was home alone, relaxed at the kitchen table with a puzzle and the glow of the lake at sunset. She told me later she heard them before she saw them, the deep growl of Harley engines echoing over the water. Years of training had taught her to size up threats fast, and 3 bikers approaching a secluded cabin after dark wasn't a coincidence. She followed protocol to the letter. First, she called 911. Reporting the situation clearly. Then she triggered the external alarms and announced through the loudspeakers, "This is private property. The police have been notified. Leave now." They ignored her. Instead, they dismounted and advanced with hostile intent, one gripping a crowbar, another a knife, the third slipping on thick gloves meant for more than writing. When the front window shattered and their leader crawled through with a blade in hand, Rebecca stood her ground. Calm, precise, ready. She picked up the chef's knife from the counter and positioned herself between the intruder and the hallway to our bedroom. Her words were simple. "I warned you, Then she moved with the efficiency of a professional who had survived cartel ambushes. The knife-wielding man lunged, expecting fear. Instead, he met a woman who had trained agents in hand-to-hand combat. She disarmed him with a joint lock that broke his wrist and cut across his forearm when he tried to grab her with his other hand. The screams were enough for the other two. They fled into the night, unwilling to test her further. By the time I raced back from my meeting, the driveway was crowded with police cruisers. Paramedics were loading the injured man into an ambulance, but something about it all gnawed at me. Career criminals don't break into occupied homes through front windows, and they prefer stealth, not theatrics. This wasn't a robbery, it was a message. That suspicion was confirmed when Rebecca showed me what had slipped from the attacker's wrist during the fight: a leather bracelet with a silver emblem, an eagle clutching a pine branch, the letters PL engraved beneath it. I had seen that very same symbol just weeks earlier. It had been pinned neatly to the lapel of Victoria Ashworth's blazer. The emblem on the bracelet haunted me, the eagle gripping a pine branch, the letters PL gleaming beneath. It could easily stand for Pine Lake, or perhaps something darker. After making that connection to Victoria Ashworth, I barely slept. By morning, sunlight streaming through our newly repaired window felt unreal, as if the attack had been some twisted dream. But I knew better. I needed to learn exactly who we were up against. I spent the morning digging into Victoria's past, and what I uncovered painted a portrait of a woman obsessed with control and power. She had spent 3 decades as a corporate attorney specializing in real estate acquisitions and hostile takeovers before retiring to Pine Lake. Local archives showed she had ruled as HOA president for 12 consecutive years, always unopposed. Her campaigns built on buzzwords about protecting property values and preserving standards. Yet beneath the surface was a creeping authoritarian grip that grew tighter every year. One discovery shed light on her motives. Public records revealed her only son, Michael, had gone bankrupt after his tech startup collapsed, leaving $2 million in debt. Soon after, he was diagnosed with aggressive lymphoma, requiring experimental treatments insurance wouldn't cover. Crushing medical bills had forced Victoria to make choices she might once have avoided, and I began to suspect those choices involved dealing with people who didn't operate inside the law. Rebecca joined me at the table with her laptop, and together we mapped Victoria's reach. It was broader than I'd imagined. She wasn't just running the HOA, she owned the Pine Lake Gazette, a weekly paper delivered across the county. Her Facebook group, Pine Lake Community Safety, had nearly 800 devoted followers who treated her posts about suspicious activity like gospel. We also discovered she had pushed through multiple emergency votes in the past year, adding new bylaws with less than 24 hours notice. The HOA rules themselves were a straitjacket of 52 regulations covering everything from the shade of exterior paint to the permitted height of decorative shrubs. Violations started at $500 but could escalate to $5,000 for repeat offenses. Even worse, Victoria had built an enforcement system where appeals went only to committees she appointed. She was judge, jury, and executioner. That afternoon, our suspicions were confirmed when Victoria arrived at our porch without warning, flanked by 2 men she introduced as community safety consultants. They were in tailored suits, but their military posture was unmistakable. The way they scanned exits and surveyed our home told me everything. If they weren't HOA volunteers, they were security contractors. Victoria herself looked as if she'd come straight from a board meeting. Every detail of her appearance perfect. She sat in a porch chair uninvited and began with a smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, I came to discuss last night's unfortunate incident, and how it reflects on Pine Lake's reputation." Rebecca stepped out from the kitchen, her voice calm but cutting. "The only thing tarnishing this community is that someone orchestrated an attack on our home." Victoria's expression never wavered, but her eyes turned icy. "I understand your distress, but wild accusations won't solve anything. What matters now is keeping Pine Lake safe and harmonious. Your property already stands out for its broken bar, unusual design, and now security concerns only heighten tensions. Conflict helps no one." It was a masterclass in manipulation of framing us as the problem while positioning herself as the voice of reason. She was rewriting the narrative so that our modern cabin was somehow to blame for the violence. "Our design was approved by the county," I answered firmly, and our security measures exist because we were attacked. County approval and community acceptance," she replied smoothly, "are two very different matters. But I can offer you a solution. Mountain Vista Development is interested in acquiring properties like yours. They offer generous terms, allowing families to relocate without unnecessary stress." Rebecca and I exchanged a glance. Her words weren't an affront, they were a warning. This wasn't about design, it was about forcing us out under the guise of relocation. "We're not selling," I said flatly. "This is our home." Victoria rose gracefully, her consultants flanking her like bodyguards. "I hope you'll reconsider, Mr. Thompson. Pine Lake has ways of encouraging cooperation from residents who struggle with integration." She paused at the repaired window, studying it like a general assessing the aftermath of a battle. Before leaving, Rebecca and I sat in silence afterward, both realizing this was far more than an overzealous HOA. Victoria had resources, influence, and no hesitation about using intimidation. She was playing a game with rules we hadn't seen before. That evening, our neighbor Bob Matthews knocked on the door carrying a bottle of bourbon and a worried look. A retired D agent, Bob had lived at Pine Lake for 5 years, and his face bore the lines of someone who had dealt with dangerous people for a lifetime. "Marcus." "Rebecca." His voice was low, cautious, as his eyes swept the area like he expected ears in the shadows. "I saw Victoria here earlier. You need to know about the Morrison family, the ones who owned this place before you." We listened as he laid it out. "They didn't leave over HOA disputes. Their dog was poisoned. Their car was vandalized 3 times. Their house was broken into while they were at their daughter's wedding. Victoria's people made their lives hell until they sold to one of her shell companies for less than half its value." Bob's words kept me awake, but they also sharpened my focus. If Victoria had built a system to drive families out, there would be records of documents, permits, ownership trails, and I knew how to read the story written in those details. By dawn, I was buried in the county assessor's database, fueled by coffee and determination. Within hours, a chilling pattern emerged. Over the past 3 years, 7 families had sold their Pine Lake homes at 45% below market value. Each property had been purchased by one of 3 LLCs, Mountain Vista Development, Pine Lake Holdings, or Lakefront Properties. Cross-checking with the Secretary of State's business registry revealed a web of shell corporations, but every thread led back to the same registered agent, Preston Hayes of Victoria's attorney. The pattern was always the same. Families first faced petty HOA violations, some mailbox paint, garden borders, roof shingles. When they resisted, fines escalated into lawsuits. Then came the intimidation, vandalism, harassment, unexplained break-ins. In one case, a garage fire investigators couldn't prove was arson, but couldn't dismiss either. Eventually, each family caved. After lunch, Rebecca joined me, bringing her expertise from the D. She had spent years tracking money through cartels, and this smelled the same. She compiled the property data into a spreadsheet and pointed to the pattern. Every sale happens within 60 days of the final HOA judgment. That's not chancia, that's coordination. Someone is timing these purchases to maximize profit. Digging deeper made things worse. Rebecca's contacts revealed Hayes had twice been investigated for ethics violations tied to real estate. Both cases quietly dropped when complainants withdrew. Meanwhile, Mountain Vista Development's funding traced back to investors with casino and money laundering ties in 3 states. While she worked her channels, I focused on mapping the strategy. Using my modeling software, I built a 3D overlay of Pine Lake, layering in ownership and violation patterns. The picture was undeniable. Victoria was systematically targeting homes along the eastern Sharia, the most valuable stretch thanks to sunrise views and forest protection. Whoever controlled those 15 properties could build a massive resort, free from local opposition. But while we uncovered the scheme, the pressure on us mounted fast. Our attorney Diana Roberts had filed a formal response to the HOA lawsuit, but fees had already climbed past $15,000 and we weren't even close to trial. Victoria's brilliance lay in her simplicity: drown families in litigation, bleed them dry, and scoop up their homes for pennies. And that afternoon, The first escalation arrived. Victoria escalated her campaign of psychological warfare with precision. Flyers began appearing in every mailbox around Pine Lake, each one featuring a glossy photo of our cabin under the bold headline, "Does this belong here?" The text warned that our sleek modernist home threatened both property values and the community's character. At the same time, a Facebook event appeared, billed as a community safety meeting, which painted Rebecca and me as dangerous outsiders with shady pasts and violent tendencies. The smear tactics worked. Neighbors who had once stopped to chat now crossed the street to avoid us. At the grocery store, Philip, the manager who always seemed jittery, apologized as he explained that longtime customers had complained about our presence. He gently suggested we might prefer shopping in another town. Even our landscaping service canceled. Hiding behind scheduling conflicts everyone knew were really pressure from Victoria's network. The breaking point came after dinner one evening. We pulled into our driveway to find the exterior walls of our cabin covered in red spray paint. "Get out" had been scrawled across our front door, and the word "dangerous" stretched across the siding facing the road. This wasn't the sloppy anger of teenagers. The crisp lettering and strategic avoidance of our cameras made it clear. This was professional intimidation. Rebecca's response was clinical. She photographed the patterns, measured letter heights, and examined the ground for footprints. "This wasn't a neighbor," she said flatly. "This was coordinated corporate intimidation disguised as community outrage." As we were documenting the damage, Amy Cartera, our cautious but friendly neighbor, appeared at the edge of the property. She was 45, an accountant, and usually avoided HOA politics. But that night, she looked over her shoulder nervously before speaking. "Marcus, Rebecca," she whispered. "I need to tell you something. But not here. Meet me tomorrow at Brewster's Coffee, 9 a.m. There are things about Victoria you don't know." I can't be seen talking here. Before I could answer, Amy's expression shifted to fear. She turned abruptly and hurried home. I followed her gaze and spotted a black sedan across the street. Two men sat inside, watching us. The car idled for a long moment, then rolled away slowly once Amy was inside. Standing in our vandalized driveway, Rebecca and I understood. This wasn't a neighborhood dispute anymore. We were under surveillance by people with resources, coordination, and a willingness to escalate. The next morning, Amy arrived late to the coffee shop, visibly shaken. She ordered a large coffee and chose a corner table where she could monitor both entrances. "Sorry," she whispered. "I'm paranoid, but Victoria has eyes everywhere. People who oppose here a broken bar tends to suffer accidents." Over the next hour, Amy laid out a chilling picture. She had served as the HOA's unofficial treasurer until 2 years earlier, when she discovered major financial discrepancies. Victoria had brushed them off as errors, but Amy found evidence that over $400,000 in HOA funds were being siphoned into private legal fees for Preston Hayes's services unrelated to community management. When Amy requested an audit, she was removed from her role, and her property was suddenly cited for 17 violations. "She's been stockpiling money," Amy explained quietly. "The dues, the fines, even settlements from families who couldn't afford to fight. She's built a war chest to over $2 million to fund her expansion." But Amy warned us that the money wasn't staying local. She's connected with outside players, specialists who pressure families to sell without leaving criminal evidence. The documents Amy had smuggled out before her removal confirmed it. Preston Hayes wasn't just Victoria's lawyer. He had incorporated 16 shell companies, each designed to mask the true ownership of properties around Pine Lake. Even worse, the funding trail pointed to Solaris International, an investment group tied to casino development in Nevada and money laundering probes in Florida. When I relayed all this to Diana Roberts, our attorney, even she looked shaken. "Marcus," she said, "I've fought abusive HOAs for 15 years. I've never seen an operation this advanced. Victoria isn't bending rules as she's built her own parallel system, and she controls it completely. We'll have to move carefully." Her plan was to demand a forensic audit of the HOA's finances. Under Colorado law, homeowners had the right to examine the books. If we could prove misappropriation, Victoria's entire operation could unravel. But fighting her came at a price. Legal bills had already climbed past $22,000. and Victoria hit us with another $8,000 in fines. I spent sleepless nights crunching numbers, wondering how long before we'd be forced to sell just to survive. Rebecca even updated her resume, considering a return to federal service for financial stability. Victoria struck back quickly. The Pine Lake Gazette ran a front-page editorial branding us outside agitators who threatened community harmony. Someone leaked the police report from the motorcycle attack, twisting Rebecca's act of self-defense into proof that she was violent and unstable. Online, Victoria's Facebook group exploded with coordinated posts describing us as dangerous intruders. Neighbors shared photos of our home, framing its modern design as evidence of our disdain for community values. The harassment spread beyond reputation. Local businesses turned us away. Our internet service mysteriously failed, with maintenance issues dragging on for days. Even the postal service suddenly had trouble delivering to our address. Then Victoria offered what she called a gracious resolution. She summoned me to the Pine Lake Country Club, a place dripping with mahogany, leather, and old money. It was her stage, carefully chosen so every witness would see her behaving like a reasonable leader. "Mr. Thompson," she said smoothly, settling into her chair with the poise of royalty, "Mountain Vista Development has authorized me to offer $525,000 for your property. A clean break. Before things spiral further." It was an insult, a $350,000 less than we had paid. A financial wrecking ball dressed as compromise. But I had come prepared, phone recording quietly in my pocket. I raised my voice just enough for nearby tables to hear. "Mrs. Ashworth, I will never sell my home to someone who has terrorized my wife and orchestrated attacks against us." Her smile remained, but her eyes went cold. "Mr. Thompson, you don't seem to understand the gravity of your situation." Victoria leaned across the polished country club table, her voice velvet over steel. "My reach extends far beyond Pine Lake. If you insist on being stubborn, I can make your life unbearable." Her words echoed in my head as I left the club, but the text message from Rebecca that lit up my phone made my blood run cold. 6 motorcycles, full tactical gear. "I'm in position, Marcus. This isn't intimidation anymore, it's elimination." I drove like a man possessed, knuckles wide against the steering wheel, hard hammering with every mile. This wasn't another scare tactica, this was a kill mission. 6 riders equipped like soldiers meant Victoria had crossed the line from harassment to outright assault. I called 911 while weaving through traffic, urging my truck faster, but the 15-minute trip felt endless. When I finally reached our street, flashing lights filled the driveway, police cruisers, an ambulance. I braced for the worst. Instead, I found Rebecca standing calmly with a deputy, describing events with the composure of a field commander. The officer's expression was half disbelief, half admiration. Our cabin looked like the aftermath of a battlefield exercise. Rebecca had turned every architectural detail I designed into part of a fortress. The steel shutters concealed and the walls had dropped into place, sealing windows into armored barriers and forcing the attackers into narrow kill zones. The strobe system, originally for burglar deterrence, pulsed in sync with smoke generators that filled the yard with a blinding haze. "They expected a break-in," Rebecca explained later, her tone clinical. "They walked into a tactical operations center. The evidence was scattered across the property. 2 motorcycles toppled where their riders had been incapacitated by submission holds. Another was abandoned at the road's edge, its rider fleeing after seeing his team dismantled by a woman who moved through smoke like a ghost." The leader, however, had tried brute force, slamming a ram into our front door only to be caught when Rebecca triggered the shutters, pinning his leg and shattering bone. It was the kind of injury that screamed self-defense. Impossible to spin otherwise. But what separated this attack from the earlier incident was the caliber of the men. This wasn't a ragtag group of hired muscle. They had encrypted radios, professional gear, and coordination that reeked of military or law enforcement training. Rebecca recognized the leader instantly, Carl Viper Mason, a former cartel enforcer she'd crossed paths with during DEA operations on the border. "Carl Mason should be serving 20 years for murder and trafficking," she told me grimly. "If he's out here, someone with serious influence spent the system to get him released." The implication was chilling. Victoria wasn't just pulling strings locally, she had access to people who could twist the federal justice system itself. When Rebecca's old D contacts dug into Solaris International, the truth surfaced. It wasn't just a real estate group, it was a laundering front, scrubbing cartel money through luxury properties, casinos, and human smuggling profits. Pine Lake was to be their crown jewel, a luxury resort perfectly placed to funnel millions under the guise of legitimate business. Victoria's land grab wasn't about power over neighbors. It was about building a private enclave where international criminals could operate beyond oversight. For Mason, though, the job was personal. His brother Miguel had died in a raid Rebecca led years ago. "He blames me," she said quietly, laying out the old files. "This isn't just business for him. He won't stop until one of us is dead." The deputies on scene seemed more interested in painting Rebecca as the aggressor than in pursuing the truth. Sergeant Williams, the lead investigator, scrutinized our defenses more closely than the attacker's weapons. "Mrs. Thompson," he said with barely veiled suspicion, "3 hospitalized men suggests your response was excessive." It was clear Victoria's influence had bled deep into local law enforcement. But then our neighbor, Bob Matthews, stepped forward with a revelation that changed everything. Carrying a metal briefcase and flashing a badge, he dropped his Section 8 of the easygoing retiree. "It's time," he said. "Operation Pine Shield goes active." Bob was no ordinary neighbor, he was still an undercover D agent, embedded for years. The case against Victoria wasn't just Rebecca's burden, it was part of a 3-year federal operation. Inside the briefcase were financial records, surveillance images, intercepted calls laying bare Solaris International's network from Pine Lake to global drug cartels. The Morrison family, whose sudden disappearance had haunted the neighborhood, hadn't been victims at random. They had been undercover agents, their cover blown just as they closed in on Solaris. And us? We weren't accidental homeowners. The D had steered us here deliberately. Rebecca's background, our cabin's defense, it had all been part of the plan to finish what the Morrisons had started. Every act of harassment, every escalation Victoria launched, was documented. She hadn't just broken HOA rules, she had committed federal crimes under surveillance. As the roar of helicopters filled the night sky, the truth became undeniable. This wasn't just our fight anymore. Tactical teams descended on Victoria's estate, agents pouring across the lake. Bob shed his neighborly smile, barking into encrypted radios with the authority of a commander. "Operation Pine Shield has been live since the Morrisons were pulled," he explained. "Every move Victoria's made has built the case. Tonight, it ends." Across 4 states, agents executed synchronized raids on Solaris-linked properties. Preston Hayes's law firm was dismantled by forensic accountants. Mountain Vista's Denver headquarters was seized. What had felt like a private war was revealed as the closing act of a sprawling international takedown of the largest money laundering case in federal court history. Federal agents worked through the night, seizing computers, ledgers, and encrypted communication devices, evidence that laid bare the depth of Victoria's criminal empire. On Rebecca's laptop, a live tactical map displayed the progress of each raid, and I found myself awestruck by the precision it took to dismantle such a vast operation. Victoria's reach extended far beyond Pine Lake. The files Bob's team had collected revealed corruption that infiltrated county offices, state courts, even parts of the federal prison system, all tied together by an international web of banking connections. What had started as a battle over HOA politics was exposed as a multi-billion-dollar enterprise laundering money for cartels, human traffickers, and terrorist groups. Bob explained it as he monitored radio chatter from the strike teams. Pine Lake wasn't just a vanity project for Victoria, it was a front. A luxury resort attracting wealthy foreign clients could move millions in daily transactions under the guise of legitimate business, a perfect machine for cleansing dirty money. Her systematic buyout of lakefront properties wasn't personal ambition, it was about building one of the most effective laundering centers in North America. The arrests unfolded in carefully timed phases to keep suspects from warning each other. Victoria herself was taken down in dramatic fashion. At an emergency home meeting she had called to rally support against us, federal agents waited until she began her speech about removing troublesome residents. Then badges flashed, Miranda rights were read, and 30 stunned neighbors watched their president led away in handcuffs. Her attorney, Preston Hayes, didn't fare better. He was caught in his office frantically deleting files, unaware that investigators had mirrored his servers months earlier. Forensic teams recovered detailed records of wire transfers, property purchases, coded correspondencia that left prosecutors with an airtight case. His attempt to cover his tracks only added obstruction charges to his growing indictment. The most intense capture came when Carl Viper Mason and his surviving crew were cornered at a safe house 40 miles away. Agents had traced their movements through the abandoned tactical gear left at our cabin. When Mason tried to bolt through a back door, he was taken down and charged with weapons violations and resisting arrest, ensuring he would never again see freedom outside prison walls. As the raids concluded, Bob sat us down and revealed the truth about our involvement. "Marcus, Rebecca, you need to understand, you weren't here by coincidence." The words chilled me. He explained that the D had deliberately steered us toward the Morrison property after their cover was blown. Rebecca's D experience and my expertise in secure architectural design made us the perfect candidates to withstand Victoria's intimidation while gathering the evidence needed to finish the case. Every skirmish, every lawsuit, every escalation had been part of a larger strategy. Even our attorney, Diana Roberts, had been quietly working with federal prosecutors, shaping a legal path that forced Victoria into incriminating herself. Motions, audits, discovery requests, all designed to leave a paper trail of her criminal tactics. One of the most critical allies turned out to be Catherine Walsh, a board member who had been secretly feeding intel to the feds. Her access to HOA finances and private correspondence gave investigators real-time insight into Victoria's next move. Catherine's conscience had driven her to risk everything, and her cooperation had made many of the raids possible. By dawn, the scale of Solaris International's empire was undeniable. They had been moving more than $200 million a year through luxury real estate projects, and Pine Lake had been intended as their crown jewel capable of laundering $500 million annually. The seized files documented links to syndicates in Mexico, Colombia, Eastern Europe, and Southeast Asia. What began as harassment from a domineering neighbor had unraveled into a global conspiracy threatening national security. Standing on the deck of our cabin, watching the sun rise over the lake, I finally felt the weight of it lifting. But Bob's last words left us with an uneasy truth. This was just one operation. Solaris International has been running these networks for over 2 decades. Pine Lake was only one node in a much larger system, and now, they know who you are. Months later, I sat in a federal courthouse as the final chapter closed. Victoria Ashworth received a 30-year sentence. Her empire crumbled under public scrutiny, turning into a media spectacle that exposed the rot festering behind Pine Lake's fall. Section 8 of wealth. Hayes was given 20 years. Other board conspirators faced sentences ranging from 7 to 15 years. None of them would be able to spread their corruption again. The financial restitution was almost as satisfying as the convictions. Rebecca and I were awarded $3.2 million in damages and whistleblower compensation. Federal asset seizures totaled over $50 million, which would be redirected to victims across multiple states and countries. International cooperation froze Solaris assets in a dozen nations, and their leadership was hunted down under global warrants. A $500 million judgment wiped out their ability to rebuild. Pine Lake itself was transformed. The 15 properties Victoria had acquired through shell companies were seized and turned into a conservation trust, preserving the land and preventing future exploitation. The resort development was dead forever. Our community was reborn. Bob Matthews, no longer hiding behind his cover, was unanimously elected HOA president. He spearheaded reforms through a new transparency charter, mandatory audits, open budgets, conflict of interest safeguards, ensuring no single person could wield unchecked power again. I shifted from being a besieged homeowner to a trusted advisor. The HOA asked me to design new protective features for neighborhood homes, giving families the means to defend themselves against threats. Rebecca found her own calling, creating a women's self-defense program that spread across the county. What had been trauma became empowerment, teaching women how to resist violence, stalkers, and intimidation. That evening, The community gathered for a celebration, a moment none of us had believed possible months before. The transformation of our neighborhood became most clear during the annual Pine Lake barbecue. What had once been a stiff, uncomfortable gathering where residents tiptoed around Victoria's strict social order was now a genuine celebration. Families laughed, shared food, and relaxed without the fear of surveillance or HOA retaliation looming over them. Amy Carter came to us with a homemade apple pie and tears in her eyes, speaking on behalf of neighbors who had endured years of fear. "Marcus, Rebecca," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "for the first time in a decade, my daughter can play outside without me worrying about who's watching her or whether she might break some ridiculous rule. You gave us our home back." Later that evening, Bob Matthews lifted a glass in a toast that captured the spirit of the moment. "To Marcus and Rebecca Thompson," he declared, "living proof that ordinary people can take down extraordinary corruption when they refuse to be intimidated. Pine Lake is safe because they never backed down, no matter how powerful their opponents thought they were." Catherine Walsh, the former board member whose bravery had given investigators the inside edge they needed, joined in as well. "I was so ashamed of what Victoria made this community into," she admitted. "Watching you both fight back gave me the courage to finally do what I should have done years ago." Sometimes it takes fresh eyes to show longtime residents how to reclaim their neighborhood. For Rebecca and me, the most meaningful moment came later, standing together on our deck as the sun set over Pine Lake. This time, we weren't alone or isolated. We were surrounded by neighbors who had become true friends. The modern cabin that had once been a source of division was now seen as a symbol of resilience and innovation that strengthened the community instead of weakening it. "Do you ever regret not selling when we had the chance?" Rebecca asked quietly, watching children play freely on the beach while parents chatted nearby without fear. "Not once," I told her, wrapping my arm around the woman who had defended our home with the same determination she'd carried into far more dangerous battles. "This is our home, and sometimes, home is worth fighting for, no matter who tries to take it away." At the entrance to our property, a new sign stood proudly, "The Thompson Home, where courage defeated corruption." Beneath it, in smaller letters, the words that had guided us through every trial: "Protected by truth, defended by justice." As nights settled over Pine Lake, I realized our struggle had created something far larger than we ever imagined. It wasn't just about saving our cabin. We had helped build a community where families were safe, where transparency kept corruption in check, and where ordinary people proved that courage and persistence could dismantle even the most dangerous criminal empires. Victoria's case had set a powerful federal precedent, sparking similar investigations across the country into abusive HOAs with potential criminal ties. Rebecca's self-defense program was growing into a regional model, giving women the skills and confidence to protect themselves, while my architectural consulting was helping other families secure their homes without losing their sense of comfort. Pine Lake had gone from a front for international money laundering to a genuine sanctuary, one that valued diversity, demanded honesty, and ensured every resident had a voice in shaping its future. And so ended our journey, from homeowners under siege to community leaders who had helped expose a global criminal conspiracy. Our story is proof that ordinary people can stand up to powerful corruption and win. If you found inspiration in this story of resilience, justice, and standing up to bullies, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Ya Stories for more incredible tales of people who fought back and prevailed against the odds.